Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. And today we're talking about one of the monuments of the classical music universe, the Bach Sonatas and Partitas for solo violin. I mean, these really are a tour de force because the violin is not usually an instrument that you think of as playing alone. It's a melody instrument, right? I mean, it gets the tune, but in order for it to get the tune, something else has to have the accompaniment. So the violin is usually heard in partnership, either in large groups, in an orchestra, or with a keyboard or a something to offset the violin and let it sing to its heart's content. So solo violin music is really pretty special. It's going to involve an awful lot of trickery, harmonic legerdemain, as they say in the biz, in order to give you the impression that there's an accompaniment happening, even when there isn't. I mean, it's really kind of amazing when you think about it. And it's particularly amazing in a style such as Bach's, which is highly contrapuntal, that is multi-voiced, that a violin can play counterpoint, can play with several voices at once. And it can, although with difficulty, is another amazing thing about these works. Now, every single major violinist in the universe has recorded these pieces, all of them. So the idea that when I say this is the best recording ever, the greatest recording ever, it's one of the greatest recordings ever. One of them. Not just one of the greatest recordings in the universe of all the other music that's been recorded, but one of the greatest recordings in the universe of these works, because there are more. There are quite a few that are astoundingly fine. And I know some of you have been operating under the assumption that the greatest recordings ever mean that's the one. There's no such thing as the one with basic repertoire. There just isn't. And I've tried to explain this many, many, many times. I can get you a great performance. I can get you one of the top pick a number performances, one that most would generally acknowledge belong in that select few. But what I can't do is say that, well, if you have this one, you shouldn't listen to any of the others. Absolutely not. If you have this one, you should listen to the others, because no one performance captures everything that's contained in one of these great masterpieces. There's always another perspective that's worth investigating and that you may find rewarding and that may touch you more deeply. You never know. You can't know. So until you listen, that's the bottom line. So let's, with that in mind, with that qualification, the greatest recording ever, one of them, of the Bach Sonatas and Partitas is Arthur Grumiaux. And some of you have been begging me to talk about this, and I really should, because it is stupendous. I mean, among the sort of golden age violinists, there are two recordings of these works that are considered to be references. This is one of them, and the other is Nathan Milstein on Deutsche Grammophon, which I've also talked about. So, you can take your pick, but there are, of course, lots of others as well. What are the special qualities that Arthur Grumiaux brings to these pieces? Well, one of the ways I think to think about them is to consider, first of all, what they are musically. What's the difference between a sonata and a partita? Well, a partita is basically a dance suite, a collection of Baroque dances. The standard dances were allemande, courante, sarabande, and gigue. Those were the basics, and then there could be others. You could have bourrées and hornpipes, and allure, and there's all these different names of all these different dances from different countries around Europe that had their own special qualities. And Bach takes advantage of many of them in the partitas. In the sonatas, now the sonatas are works that, sonatas came in two varieties. They came in chamber sonatas and church sonatas. Basically, that was the division, sort of initiated by Corelli in his great opera for strings. And you had church sonatas and sonata da camera, chamber sonatas. Chamber sonatas included dance music, among other things. Church sonatas usually began with a slow movement and it did not contain sort of dance stuff, because that would have been considered appropriate for the liturgy, would it? No, you wouldn't want to get up and start dancing in the pew. So they were serious compositions, and the others were lighter compositions, if you want to make that distinction too. Although with Bach, everything is often equally serious. So that's what we have here. We have 3 sonatas. Here they are. They are the sonatas in G minor, A minor, and C major. There you go. And then you've got 3 partitas in B minor, D minor, and E major. Now, just because these partitas have dances, that doesn't mean they're light. In fact, the biggest movement in the entire set is in the D minor partita. It's the concluding chaconne. It's called a chaconne. The chaconne is a set of variations over a repeated bass line, a ground bass, as they call it in the business. And this thing is about 13 to 15 minutes long in most performances. It's big. It's gigantic. It's evidence of the fact that size has nothing to do with the number of instruments called upon to play the thing in question. It's an inherent musical quality. And this thing is gigantic, even though it's written for just 1 violin. So what does a great performance have to give us? Well, the giganticism is something that happens naturally because of the length of the thing. Even if you take a pretty quick tempo, it's going to last, well, more than 12 minutes, let's say. It's going to last a while. It's a big thing. You just have to get through it. And you have to get through it at a tempo that's playable and that makes intelligible sense and all of that. So that's that thing. But conveying the scale of it, the scope of it, well, that is a function of the actual tempo that you adopt. You could make it seem really grandiose, or you could make it be a little less so. Either way, it's pretty big. But the other quality of it, it's a quality that Grumiaux has, I think, to an extraordinary degree, is chaconne is still a dance. After all, at the end of the day, it is a dance. It's a slow dance. It may be a grave dance, but it's a dance. It has to have movement in all of its parts and at all times. And that's something that Grumiaux realizes especially well, I think, compared to many other violinists. And he does it because his tempo is rather flowing. He gets through it in between 13 and 14 minutes. And the flowing tempo, of course, helps with rhythm, and it keeps the thing moving purposefully forward. But the other thing that you want to keep in mind, I think, and that Grumiaux really, really does extraordinarily well, is the fugues. Yes, you heard me right. I said fugues. These pieces have fugues. Fugues for a violin. What's a fugue? Well, you know what a fugue is. It's like a round, where you have several parts and they all enter sequentially and they're developed as it goes with episodes and then more sequential entries and all of that stuff. There are actual fugues here for solo violin. And that means that you've got 2 or 3 things going simultaneously while you're playing with one bow and one hand on the fingerboard. And that is an extraordinary tour de force. So they're incredibly difficult to play. But aside from that, they have to have clarity. They have to have linear direction. And they're also huge. I mean, one of the fugues, the fugue in the C major sonata is 10 minutes long or more than 10 minutes long. I mean, for solo violin, that's enormous. That's a lot of music. So keeping those fugues afloat is a major job. There's another one that's 7 minutes and one's like 5 or 6, but they are big by any standard. And the fact that they happen to be written for a solo violin is kind of incidental. One of the amazing things about Bach, of course, is that his music seems to exist independently of whatever its setting is. It's just there, and whoever has to play it has the unenviable task of trying to realize its expressive and formal dimensions with whatever resources they have on hand. And this is the locus classicus for that. So Grumiaux really, really nails the fugues. I think that they're some of the most powerful statements for the solo violin, and he plays them unbelievably well. And then, as I've already hinted at with respect to the chaconne, the dance movements in the partitas are just delightful. I mean, there's a lot here that's just charming, ingratiating, melodically fluent. It's not all grim Gothic architecture, if you know what I mean. I mean, there's just beautiful dance-like movements that are wonderfully elegant and poised and shapely and intelligently done. And that's Arthur Grumiaux. He was that kind of a violinist. He could realize the bigness inherent in the music, but it's never at the expense of rhythm. It's never at the expense of a beautiful tone. He just really puts his all into the music and makes it a joy to listen to from beginning to end. And so here it is on what was Philips, now Decca, and it's one of the great recordings of anything, of the violin, ever, period, ever. Believe you me. So keep on listening, friends, and thanks for joining me. Take care.